is the DCRTV Podcast, covering radio, television, and all media for Washington, Baltimore, and beyond. DCRTV.
Back in the late 1980s, there was a pretty intense radio battle between two top 40 stations, WAVA and Q107. Lou, you worked at both stations back then. Can you tell me, was the competition pretty fierce?
Well, I will, and I will also tell you there was a third station, B106.7. which of course is now WJFK, but the big battle really was between Q and WAVA. I think it was fought, Dan, on two levels. One, on the streets with appearances and street teams and things like that. And number two, with contesting on air and also promotion on TV. There was a lot of that going on.
On the podcast today, we're going to talk about what was happening behind the scenes at both WAVA and Q107. We'll talk about why Lou left WAVA and why Q107 ultimately gave up on the battle and became Mix 107.3. Lou was there for the actual format change. They had some technical problems on that day. We'll find out what happened and how they fixed it. And Lou is also going to talk to us about his incredible 14-year run doing mornings at Wash FM. Joining us on the podcast today is Loo Katz.
DCRTV. Loo Katz.
Never underestimate the power of 105 WAVA, Arlington, Washington, your station for power portion number 3. That fire engine red. 944S. More chances for you to qualify. Coming up Monday morning with John Geronimo and Mike O'Mara early on the WAVA Morning Zoo.
Lou, let's start off with WAVA. So you had been working in DC radio for a long time. You ended up at WAVA. How did that come about? How did you get hired there?
Well, actually, that was my second, during the top 40 days, was my second visit at WAVA. I was there first when it was Album Rock in 1980. And then I went to WPGC, and I spent my time there. And then I went over to WAVA in the mid-'80s, right in the heat of the CHR battles between 107 and 106. And I started out actually as their promotion director and sort of a jack of all trades, Dan, doing, weekend air shifts and things like that. But mostly it was on-air promotion.
Now, you had done so many on-air slots at different stations. You'd been at WEAM, WEZR, WWDC, WPGC. Did it feel almost like you were almost taking a step back, not being on air?
No, because for me, early on in my career, I always felt that the more different areas that I had experience in would benefit me in the long term. My first love was being behind the mic and being on the air, but I had to be flexible in order to stay in my home market to work. A lot of jocks, needless to say, will go all over the country to get that on-air gig. And due to family commitments, I really felt that it was very important for me to stay in my hometown. And because of that, I didn't necessarily always get an on-air job. So I would, for a few years back in the early to mid-'70s, I was a board op for NBC on Nebraska Avenue in Washington. So I did that. I did on-air promotion. So yeah, it was, I don't feel it was a step back, but eventually, it turned out okay, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you ended up in middays from there. So how did that come about? How did you end up switching from promotions to doing middays?
Oh, gosh. I don't particularly remember which jock was doing it before me, but I do remember I was offered the midday gig and I took that and I did it for a while. And then Jim Elliott had been looking for some work. Don and Mike were on during the morning show, doing the 105 Morning Zoo. And they decided to hire Jim Elliott to come in to do midday. So they moved me to 10 to 2 at night for a while. And so I, basically had a 12-hour shift, but I was still on the air and I did that for a while. And then eventually they decided they didn't want Elliott anymore and then moved me back to midday.
Yeah.
And then that was my on-air life. And occasionally I would fill in for the late David Haynes, who was the newsman, of course, with Don and Mike on WAVA. And they'd pull me off midday, and I would just go ahead and get it in the morning and do the news. So again, flexibility was very important to me. Yeah.
So what do you think they were thinking when they brought in Jim Elliott? Because, Jim Elliott had done mornings at a whole bunch of stations, and it wasn't like they were bringing him in to groom him to do mornings. Don and Mike were pretty established at that point. Well,
Sure.
What do you think their thinking was?
Well, I can tell you what their thinking was. They wanted a big name, and Elliott had been in the market for years, on air, unlike Loo Katz, who'd been in the market for years, but not always on air. And Elliott, had been doing mornings with Woodside at Q107, and prior to that at PGC. So they had an opportunity to bring in Jim Elliott, and that's what they did.
So overall, at that period of time, how do you think WAVA was competing with Q, both musically and with the promotions? What was at that point? Would you say WAVA was winning?
God, Dan, I can't remember the actual Arbitron numbers back then, but I will tell you, excuse me, that it was really, really a constant battle on air for better promotions, more TV time, bigger cash giveaways. One of the more memorable promotions we did, and this is when I was on air at WAVA, was the Power Porsche giveaway. We gave away, I think in a period of 2 years, 2 Porsche 911s, which back then was humongous.
Right, yeah.
Q107 had done their fiery red Pontiac Fiero coupes, and they gave away 16 of those. So it was like a back and forth kind of thing like that, and cash giveaways. And also when I was at WAVA, before I went on the air full time, I was able with some connections and more than the connections, Dan, a lot of luck, was able to bring the Beach Boys, which was always the big summer concert on Q107. I was able to arrange that to be on WAVA.
Oh, awesome.
And that lasted one summer, and then they shut the concerts down and have never done another concert to that size out there ever again.
Why'd they shut it down? Was it just crazy?
They had hundreds of thousands of people, and they trashed the place.
Wow.
And I think the Park Service had enough.
Yeah. One thing with WAVA is they had that great reverb back at that period. And I had always heard that the reverb that WAVA was using was the old WPGC reverb. Is that true?
That is absolutely 100% correct.
How did that come about?
Well, God, I'm trying to remember. I should. The chief engineer at WAVA, a guy named Chip Fetro, he was always hanging out with, everybody, all the engineers and a lot of the jocks in the market. And when PGC decided to go to, I think it was before Classy 95, and they actually changed the call letter, and it was a whole different thing. They had no use for the reverb. And Steve Kingston, big radio guy, a native Washingtonian, his wife was working, Patty Steele was working part-time at WAVA. And they said, well, why don't we, PGC's probably not using the reverb. Let's see if we can get it. And they gave it to us.
Wow, that's awesome.
Well, gave it to WAVA. But yeah, it was a big EMT brand plate reverb, the size of a mattress leaning up against one of the walls in the transmitter room.
Wow.
But it's their audio, WAVA's audio processing was really
incredible.
top-notch.
Yeah, really, really was. So then how did things end at WAVA for you?
I got canned.
You got canned at the end? Wow.
This is after I had mentioned, I had been doing midday, then went to nights, then back to midday. And then I got off the air one afternoon, and Alan Goodman and the PD brought me in his office and said, we're making a change. Sorry. And that was it.
And that's just the way it is in radio. I mean, it's like the station can change directions on a whim, but just personally, what was that like? Because now all of a sudden you're out of a job. You've still got to pay for your housing and your food. Was that just a real stressful time?
It was probably I would say probably one of the most stressful periods in my career. Yeah. I did not see it coming. Nobody gave me any notice. I was completely blindsided. The only inkling that there might have been an issue was this guy named Brian Bridgman, who was the music director at the time. He and I did not really get along. We were button heads all the time. And I was messing around with his music and he was getting pissed, whatever it was. Yeah. And I sort of think Brian was the driver behind getting me out of there. And so it was a total shock. This was 1989. And I joined the station in, I think, 84. So I was there almost 5 years.
Wow. So then what do you do? I mean, so like day one, do you just start getting on the phone, just trying to find somewhere else to go?
And reaching out to anybody and everybody who I could talk to. And, I landed some part-time on-air work at the time was 95.9, Z95 up in Baltimore. So I was doing some part-time stuff there. I was doing some part-time stuff at Frederick at Z104 up there, just trying to make ends meet. And then the weirdest thing, literally, Dan, happened. I think it was canned on a Friday. And I think the following Monday, I got a phone call from Rick Cummings, who at the time was the programming chief for all the Emmis-owned stations, and Emmis owned WAVA at the time. And he said, we're flipping 96.5 down in Houston from a top 40 to a Churban or urban CHR format, and wanted to know if I could come down and help. And he said, and we'll cover all your expenses. We'll fly you down. We'll put you up in a hotel. We'll get you a car, whatever you need. And I said, wait a minute. Your company just canned me on Friday.
Right.
I'd love to. What's going on? And he said, hey, we had nothing to do with that. We think your work is great. Would you like to come down? So I did that for like 4 or 5 weeks, and I was working on the air in Houston, and I was there for the format change, and they offered me mornings to stay, and the money wasn't right, and I wanted to go back home because Washington really was where it was at for me. And I ended up, luckily, doing some part-time work at MZQ, which at the time, in late '89, was the number one station in Washington, WMZQ, the country station, and I got a part-time job there. And I did that for a few months. And then there was an opening at Q107 for a production director job, and I got that.
Yeah. And I mean, that goes back to being flexible, just doing whatever you got to do to get in there.
And the production job at Q107 required me to do one on-air shift a week. And that was their Sunday night talk show called Live Line, and it had really been a staple of the station's format for years. So all of a sudden now I'm hosting a talk show at 10 or 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday night for 2 hours. So yes, flexibility was really key for me. Yeah.
Had you done a talk show before in your career?
No,
never. Was that hard?
It was different. It was weird. Because I had never done that, an all-spoken format like that. But I had a young lady who was a volunteer who was very helpful in getting me guests, and we had guests and all that stuff. And we had open phones too. So yeah, and I'd had ringers who I would call to say, hey, there's nobody on the phone lines. You got to call in, right. Make it sound like somebody's listening.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was but that was 1989, 1990. Yeah.
So before that came about, like, did you just know something's going to come, or did you ever think that this could be the end?
No, Dan, I never thought about the end, but I did keep trying my best to try to get a full-time on-air gig.
Yeah.
And when Q107's ratings were sagging to the point where the revenue was really down, and Capital Cities ABC, which owned it, wasn't even Disney at the time. And when they owned it, they decided that they had to make a shift in the format. And they saw the huge success that the Mix 106.5 in Baltimore had been getting. And they decided, they brought a consultant in and they looked it all over and they said, we're going to change the format. So they went basically from CHR to hot AC.
With the format change, I mean, with you being at that time in production, I mean, the station needs production no matter what the format is. Did you feel like your job was safe, or do you think, oh my God, like this could be another layoff here?
Well, the good news is when Lauren Pelagi, who was the PD at the time, when it was Q107 and then there for the flip to Mix 107.3, Lauren pulled me into his office one day and he says, I have to talk to you about something confidential. I had to sign some papers to keep it under wraps. And he said, we're changing the format. The call letters are going to stay the same, but it's going to go from Q107 to Mix 107.3 with the logo line, not too hard, not too light. The light being the jab to 94.7 WLTT, W light, they called it 94.7. And he said, we want to offer you afternoons. Are you interested?
Awesome.
Said, yeah, that's definitely interested.
Yeah.
So that was the start of that. And then doing the production, we had jingles made and all of those kinds of things and music changes. So there was a lot going on that I had to keep very, very quiet.
Yeah. How long did you have, like from the time that he offered you afternoons until the station actually flipped?
Well, the station flipped, I believe it was on Labor Day weekend in 1990.
Okay.
From Q to Mix. And I think I probably had 4 or 5 weeks. It was not a lot of time. They had TV. They had to get TV ready. And again, this project was kept on the QT. I mean, not a lot of people knew about it.
So were you working on the new production in the studio and just hoping nobody walks in or overhears what you're doing?
Well, they had me work off hours. Okay. I was working like overnight stuff. So nobody,
Yeah.
The engineers turned off all the access to the production room. I remember that with patch bays so that jocks that were on the air on Q couldn't punch into their console and, hey, what's Lou doing in production now?
Yeah.
They couldn't hear it. Nobody could hear it.
Yeah.
And, so it was kept very quiet. In fact, I had to go to National Airport and pick up the box of carts for all the new songs that we were going to play in this format literally that morning. It was cut that tight. One of the Cap City's ABC stations in Minneapolis was dubbing all these songs for us. And I literally went there and picked up this gigantic box of all these cartridges, music carts, to bring them over. That's how it started.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that too, because that's a huge task. Because back then every song would be on a cart, where today it's all computerized. It would be pretty simple to build a music library, but back then, I mean, to cart up the entire music library, I mean, that's a huge task.
Yeah, it was, but do remember, Dan, that the playlist sizes then, and even to this day, are small. I mean, if we were playing 300 to 400 songs, Toto, that was it.
Right.
So,
okay.
Okay. So, and a lot of the songs that were in the new format were also played when it was Q107. So it wasn't like we were going from, top 40 to R&B and everything had to change.
Right.
So, but there were a lot of songs that had to be added. Yeah. So it was a lot of work.
So as far as their decision to change the format, were the ratings just really down? Like, was the station just kind of dying? Q107?
The problem is we everybody wants the 25-54, demographic, and especially women. And with W Light 94.7 kicking everybody's butt with women, Wash was sort of strong. It was, and this was before Wash changed their format to Party 97. I think that was 82. But yeah, I mean, it got to the point where the teens were gone. They were all over at WAVA and B106. So it was, the revenue, it was really low. And I think they just decided to pull the plug on the format.
Yeah. All right. So you get everything ready. You've gotten all the production ready. You've got the new music library. It's time to make the switch. How did they sign off Q107?
Well, Lauren Pelagi, the PD, asked me to write a format close, a format flip, statement. And I did write something, and he did some minor editing on it. And we had our voiceover guy, Mark McKay, who I had taken over in production and who had left like a year or so before, had him voice it. And we ran that just before noon on, I guess the Friday before Labor Day. And for the last 3 hours of the format, there was no jocks. All there was like a sweeper going, "It's happening today at noon on 107.3 or whatever it was."
Yeah.
And that's all that played between every song for 3 hours. And during that time, and this is a true story, Dan, they had each of the jocks come in and they canned most of it.
Yeah. So what was the lineup? The final Q lineup?
If I can remember correctly, the final Q lineup was David Lawrence was doing mornings with Barbara Britt as his news girl.
Mm-hmm.
Celeste Clark was doing midday. Gary Spears was doing night, PM drive, afternoon drive. 6 to 10 was a guy named Danny. I can't remember his last name.
Danny Wright.
Danny Wright. There you go. Danny Wright. And then 10 to 2 was Sonny Fox, who of course now is one of America's biggest voiceover guys, John Polizzi. So he was doing 10 to 2, and I think George Mason was doing overnights.
Okay. So most of them got canned, and then what was the original mix lineup?
Well, the lineup for the new format was Jack Diamond, and Moore, Moore. Guy named Mike Moore was teamed up with Jack Diamond, so it was Diamond in the morning and Moore. That was morning drive on mix. Then Celeste Clark from 10 to 2. Was it 10 to 2, 2 to 3? And then I came on and did 3 to 7 or 2 to 7 or whatever it was. I think it was 3 to 7. And then George Mason, who the overnight guy, they moved him to 7 to midnight. And I forgot who was going to be doing overnights at that point. Okay. So not everybody got canned, but a lot of people did.
And John Polizzi, did he move into production then?
Yes. Part of that change was moving. The good news for John was he was not out of a job. The bad news is he was off the air. So he was going to take over my position as production director.
Okay.
And he did. And he eventually decided that he wanted to do different things. And he went over to actually Z104. Oh, I totally forgot about that station in the early 90s.
Yeah.
That was on the air. Yet another CHR.
Right.
So, and then he decided to go full-time voiceover, and that was his story. So it was rather uncomfortable during that time. But I think some of the jocks, if not all of them, sort of knew something was brewing. They just didn't know when it was going to happen.
Right. So then talk to me about the actual switchover. So you've done all this preparation to get things ready. You're kicking off mix. How did everything go?
Well, the PD, Lauren Pelagi, he said, well, what should be the last song? And Judy Shostak, who was the music director and had been the music director there for years, we all sort of like looked at each other and said, "Hey Jude," because in Q107's heyday, "Hey Jude" was their big $1,000 song. Mm-hmm. Now, you say to yourself, why would a Beatles record be on a CHR? But, it's such a classic song. So we all said, let's just back time it. So "Hey Jude" plays right before noon, and that'll be the last song. And that's what we did.
Yeah.
And then the announcement was read, straight voice, no music under it. And then the new station was born. And the first song was "Shannon, Let the Music," which to this day, I fought that one tooth and nail, Dan. I said, "Lauren, why would you want to start a whole new format on the station and play a song that you've played for whatever in regular rotation? What's
changing?
The significance?
Yeah.
What's the big change?"
Right.
I said, "Come on, put Chicago beginnings on, long version, do something different. But you can't play a song that everybody let the music play." He said, "We're letting the music play." I said, "Okay, you're the boss." And that was it.
And so, did everything go smoothly?
Well, then funny you asked that, because then all of a sudden we figured out that as soon as we started playing some of the other tracks that were not in normal rotation that were recorded at our sister station in Minneapolis, we found out the noise reduction system was completely different.
Oh, no.
it sounded distorted and terrible on the air. And we're all like going, oh my God, this must be for all the songs that came in. So luckily our engineers were able to jury rig that 2 of the 6 cart machines that were in the studio would be exclusively for these new songs. And they adjusted.
Oh my God. What a nightmare.
Poor Celeste is on the air playing. I don't know what the song was. It must have been like maybe the 2nd or 3rd song in the format. And it's like, oh God. But because this thing was really not tried in advance, it was so cut so close. I mean, literally, I got those songs at the airport that morning.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have a chance to go through and do much.
Right. Wow.
So that was,
well, at least
we corrected. We within 15 minutes, it was correct.
Oh, okay. That's good. Okay. So then, all right. So Mix launches, and does it catch on right away? Like, did you guys find immediate success?
I really don't remember, but I do know that in the 25 to 54 demo, which is what we were targeting in women, we did do very well.
Okay.
And
yeah,
it was never a huge 6+ or back then at the time 12+ rating on it. It was good, but it was not huge. It wasn't like the Q107 WMAL days where they were always 1 and 2 in the market for so many years. But it was more important, obviously, for the right demo to be strong, and that's what they did. Right. And the format did work. Yeah.
And as far as what you guys considered your competition, was W Light the main competitor, or did you still consider WAVA to be a competitor?
Look, they were all competitors, but I think W Light was the one we were really striving to hit because they had humongous female listeners. And in-office listening was 94.7 W Light was just friggin' huge. And I think that's because that's when the logo line came out, not too hard, not too light. Right.
Yeah.
LIGHT, not LITE. Obviously, they could figure out who we were gunning for.
Right, sure. And Wash wasn't really a competitor. Were they just a little bit too AC?
Wash was a competitor, but you had so many of these white formatted AC and top 40 stations in the market at the time. You had PGC, you had 107.3, you had 94.7, you had 97.1, you had B106. I mean, there were just a ton of stations.
Right.
I think B106. I don't remember when they dropped the top 40 format and then they went with like New Age or whatever it was. But at the time, they were like 4-5 signals that were all sort of fighting for the same group.
Right. All right. So you ended up then doing afternoons for about 10 years at Mix.
Yeah. I did afternoons for 10 years. Yeah.
And then I guess you got the call from Wash to come over there. Is that how that went down, that they stole you away? I was going through a contract negotiation and I really wanted weekends off. I didn't want to work a 6th day. My kids were young and I wanted to have more time off. And they were being real a-holes at 107.3 about giving me weekends off. Mm-hmm. And then a guy named Steve Allen, who had just been named program director of Wash FM, reached out to me and said, let's have lunch. And I said, sure. I knew the guy from college and stuff, and so we got together and he said, look, here's the deal. Here's the drill. We want to bring you over. We want to bring you over and we want you to do afternoons. Are you interested? I said, sure. And weekends off?
And weekends off. But here was the twist.
Mm-hmm.
The company at the Wash FM was at the time owned by, wasn't owned by Clear Channel yet at that time. It was owned by Evergreen or whatever the company was. And they were in the process of transferring the ownership at the same exact time that they offered me a job to go to Wash. So I had to take it on good faith that this was all really going to happen, but they couldn't really put it in writing.
Wow.
I'm going, well, that's it's quite a leap of faith to trust in you guys to do this. But the consultant at the time, Doug, Doug Erickson, I said, you have to trust me on this one, Lou. They're not going to screw you over. And they didn't.
Okay,
and
good.
I had to live with a 90-day non-compete, and I crossed the street and went over to Wash.
That's awesome. So then you were in afternoons for about 2 years?
2.5 years. And then there was a change in program directors. Steve Allen was taken off Wash and just was remaining to work at Oldies 100. And then a guy named Bill Hess came in from one of the Clear Channel stations up in Providence to run Wash FM, and to also oversee the sports station, which Clear Channel also owned, 980 AM. And after Bill Hess came in, we had lunch early on, and he said, "Look, I'm going to be wanting to make a change in mornings. And I want to put you on a morning drive. I'm 50 years old. I've never done mornings. I've never been interested in doing mornings. Why should I do mornings now?"
Right.
Why didn't you guys bring me over to do mornings in the first place instead of,
Yeah, that's a good point. Right.
And he said, well, I wasn't here, and there's been a change in management, and frankly, we're paying you too much to do afternoon drive.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good idea that you really consider doing mornings. And at that point I said, sure. And I said, now who are you going to hook me up with to do? Because at the time, Randy Martin was doing mornings on Wash FM, because when I came over, they moved her from afternoons to morning drive and got rid of Bill and Kim. Had been doing mornings on Wash for several years, and rather successfully at that. And they said, well, we could team you up with Victoria Ray, who was the news person in the morning. And I said, if we're going to make a change, we're going to make a total change.
Mm-hmm.
And I really felt bad because I liked this woman, Victoria, and she was great on the air. But I said, we're going to do it. We're going to make a change. And they wanted me to find a partner. And they suggested, why don't you listen to this woman named Lori Monica Brooks. That was it. Monica Brooks, who was working for Metro Traffic and doing news and stuff on MAL. I said, sure, I'll listen to her. And I listened to her, and we met, and we had lunch, and I told her what was going on, and I think, would you be interested? And she said, sure. And I said to her, well, by the way, Monica, is that your real name? She goes, no, my real first name is Lori. Lou and Lori's got a nice feel to it.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And we did that for almost 9 years.
Now, did it feel like almost like you had a huge weight on you? Because I mean, there's so much responsibility in morning drive that you don't have an afternoon drive. Did it feel like more stressful doing that morning shift?
Well, first of all, Dan, I had never done mornings ever except in college radio. Seriously, never done. I had filled in at Q107 for mornings when David Lawrence was on vacation, but I've never had a morning show. I never really aspired to be a morning man. My personality really isn't so much that, but they made it such a way that it wasn't overly stressful. They wanted to be a more music morning show, so there wasn't a lot of shtick, weren't a lot of bits, playing 8-10 songs an hour at minimum. So Lori would do the news, we'd do the traffic. So it was really just more, they considered mornings at Wash FM is really sort of the being in the bullpen for the at work show, which was really midday.
Yeah.
They really we were like the warm up act for midday, and that's how it was. So there wasn't a ton of pressure, but I wish we had been given more tools, like a producer or something like that. We had an intern or two over the 9 years, but not really that much. So there wasn't a lot of support for the morning show. They did promote it, but it just wasn't. I never got the feeling they were behind it 100%. Mm-hmm. And the rationale that I'd gotten from that was, well, they really only cared what happened on the station starting at 8 or 8:30 in the morning through the workday.
So then, you did mornings for 9 years, and then how did things end?
I did mornings for almost 9 years with Lori, and then Lori one day just got off the air. It was a Friday, and Bill Cahill was the program director at the time, and Lori hands me, and this is a true story, Dan, she hands me a napkin with her resignation letter on it.
Just out of the blue.
Out of the blue.
Wow.
Totally out of the blue. And I went, what are you talking about? And she goes, yeah, I can't do it anymore. She says, I can do it for a few more days next week, and that's it. She had her parents were getting older, and she just decided she was done with it. And she did not ever sign a contract with Clear Channel.
Wow.
And how that ever happened, somebody blew that up in the C suites, but she had never signed a deal. She just kept putting it off and off and off. And they said, okay, well, whatever. And so she really had no contract. She could do whatever she wanted. So she gave me a note, and I told the program director, I said, read this. And that was it.
Wow.
So
Unbelievable.
She was gone.
Yeah.
After almost 9 years of being my partner. And I had no clue. Now her husband had passed away. And so there was a lot of personal stuff going on in her life. And I certainly understood this, but, just totally caught me off guard.
Yeah. So then what did you do? How did you find your replacement?
They started looking around for replacements. And, I was getting calls as soon as the word leaked out that Lori from Wash resigned. I was getting calls from anybody and everybody who wanted to do the show. And we talked to a bunch of people out of town and up in Baltimore and other places, interviewed plays. I did some mock shows on the weekend with a couple of these people. A couple internal candidates also wanted to apply for the job. And I had a particular person in mind I wanted to do it with. Management had a different idea and decided to make the change and bring Chilli Amar in from Mix. And she had been doing afternoons with Rob Carson at 107.3. And I had known Chilli, but not that well, because when I was working at 107.3, she was over at MAL and News. Mm-hmm. So that was the part that really sort of irked me was they didn't ask me what I thought. They said, well, I understand, but the one you want to do it is not in the market. And this woman is in the market. She can get out of her contract and we can have her over here like that. And she's got, and she's on a direct competitor. So from that standpoint, I understood her putting her in, but she was not my first choice.
Right. Did everything work out when you guys started working together? Yeah.
Chilli was great. Chilli was a hard worker. It remains to be a hard worker. Strong opinions. But I mean, really a dedicated professional. I couldn't speak more highly of her. From that standpoint, she made my job extra easy.
That's great.
And she was very much into the social media stuff, to which I wasn't that much into, and she'd pick up all that. And it was, so, her strengths were good. My strengths were good. And we worked out well. And then that was, I don't know, till November 1st of 2017. And then I got off there one morning and they took me to the office and said, you're done.
Just like that. Wow.
17 years later. Don't even bother going by the office and picking up your briefcase. We'll have it delivered to you.
Was that like part of a big iHeart layoff or
no?
Wow.
That had been in the plan for a long time. And to bring Toby over from Hot 99.5, who was doing afternoons. That was the plan, to put him in the mornings. They just had to figure out when to pull the plug.
Wow.
And my deal was running out, and I sort of had a feeling something was in the air, because there was less and less morning show meetings towards the last couple of months. They weren't paying that close attention. There wasn't much input, and you can sort of read the writing on the wall. So I wasn't totally shocked that it happened, but you just never know what day or what time it's going to happen.
Sure.
So
but that's an incredible run. I mean, it's a total of 15 years that you were in mornings.
No, I was in mornings for 14 years.
14.
And personally, for me, having grown up in Washington and had been a huge fan of Washington when I was, much younger, Eddie Gallagher was really the morning guy on Wash for many, many years. He lasted 13 years, from 69 to 82. And I actually outlived him on air at Wash. I did 14 years there.
That's really remarkable. I mean, most morning guys in this market don't make it 14 years. I mean, that's really, really pretty incredible.
I was very lucky. I kept my head below, the firing lines. I did as much as I could to do the job as best I could under the circumstances. My biggest frustration was, though, Dan, that they never really took that morning show all that seriously. And there was no support, as I mentioned earlier, no producers. They promoted it, but it was not the driver of the radio station.
Right.
And I understood that, and I lived with that, and that wasn't a problem. And I remember when I talked to Chilli, and we had met for coffee, and I said, "Listen, Chilli, I got to tell you up front, completely honestly, this is not a high-profile Jack Diamond kind of morning show.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're thinking you're going to come over here and we're going to do that kind of stuff, it ain't happening."
Right.
I said, and so you're going to have to understand in your mind that the aim here is much different than what 107.3 is doing in the ratings. And she understood.
Yeah.
But I did not want to paint a false picture to her or anybody else that I was interviewing. I'm going, this is a more music morning show. We'll do a little bit of this here and there, but the music rules, and that's how it is.
Yeah. So then when they got rid of you, then your next chapter was starting Hound Radio.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about this. Tell me what you're doing now.
Well, I had a pirate station on out of my house that I called 101. It was on the dial. It was at 1980’s, the only open frequency up in Montgomery County at the time. And I was running this little pirate station that I didn't run 24/7. I'd turn it on and off. And then I decided that after I'd lost my job at Wash, I wanted to try my own thing on the internet. And for me, I had no idea how internet radio worked. I had no idea how music programming, scheduling programs work, like Music Master, which I use, or all the others that are out there. I'd never put an internet thing on it. So I was in a situation where I wanted to learn and absorb and feel how this will all come together. And I was always a big Basset Hound fan, so I figured, what the hell? And that's what we did. Houndradio.com. And we've got a free mobile app on Apple and Android. And so you can download the app for free, easy to set up. We're no commercials. We run news during the weekday and some entertainment reports during the workday. Otherwise, it's music and some weather and some features here and there, and but it's fun. For me, at my age, it gives me a chance to feel like I'm still sort of in the business, right, doing something. And it's got a handful of listeners. This is not a money generator by any stretch. It wasn't designed to be. It's just sort of more like a hobby for me, and it can keep me as busy as 12 hours a day or 2 hours a day, whatever I want to do. And the beauty is I don't have to report to anybody.
Right. That's the best part.
I go through and I change the music. I look at the current songs every week. I look at the charts, see what we're playing. I do some contests. I work with Allied Marketing in DC, and we do movie screenings, and sometimes we get some ticket giveaways at Bethesda Theater. And some Starbucks gift cards we'll give out for listeners. But, it's fun.
Yeah. Well, check it out. It's houndradio.com. Great
Correct.
station. It's Lou does a great job. So definitely check that out. Well, Lou, thank you so much. I really appreciate you making the time to talk to us here on the very first DCRTV podcast.
It's my honor, Dan, and thank you so much, and best of luck in continuing Dave's great venture.
If you enjoyed today's episode and you want to hear more podcasts like this in the future, there's two things you can do that will really help me grow the show. The first one is hit the follow button, whether you're listening in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Odyssey, whatever app you're listening to, hit the follow button. And that way you'll be notified every time there's a new episode. The second thing you can do is help me spread the word. We're a brand new podcast. I'm just starting to grow the audience. If you can tell one friend about the show, or even better, post it on social media and help me spread the word, help me build the audience, that would really mean the world to me. Thank you so much for listening to the show today. Make sure you follow along at DCRTV.com. I'm publishing news and other information that's happening in Washington and Baltimore radio and TV. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the DCRTV Podcast.